Wait.
No.
All right, sorry about that. We didn't have the recording on. So we will start with a roll call.
Okay, Christy Enselman for Richard Beck. Stacy Dupuis.
Here.
Michaela Owens.
Here.
Cody Homan.
Here.
Aaron Williams for Tom Laws.
Here.
Alex Yan. Bob Callahan. Lindy Lindstrom. Clay Tucker. Emily Bunn.
Here.
Dan Lister. Carla Nelson.
Here.
Bree Brush. Deanna Dupuis. Nina Schaefer.
Here.
Morgan Besaw.
Here.
Haley Hart. Caitlin Davison.
Here.
Andrew Glassbell.
Here.
Hannah Veal.
Here.
Lee Belt.
Here.
Troy Behunin.
Present.
Marina Lundy.
Here.
Daryl Romine.
Here.
Here he is. Okay. Craig Bergman.
Here.
Caleb Hood.
Present.
Brian McClure. Jason Van Gilder.
Present.
Still Craig. Clemente Salinas.
Here.
Mark Stoyer.
Here.
Bob Hartzog.
Here.
Matt Qualls. Sean Nickel.
Here.
Cindy Tinker.
Here.
Chelsea Johnson. Bud Corbus. Al Hofer. Crystal Rogers. Joe McMullen. It was reported that he is here, but has no microphone. Alexa Reutman.
Here.
Zach Pipemeyer. Michael Toole. Aaron Budges.
Present.
Isaac Josephek.
Present.
Stephen Hunt.
Here.
Miranda Carson.
Here.
Curtis Lovelace.
Present.
Tony Tisdale is present. Governor's office is vacant. Greater Boise Auditorium District, Cody Lund, sorry. He is not here. Okay. We have quorum.
Thank you, Tony. We'll move to open discussion and announcements. Are there any? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to let everyone know that nominations for Compass's Leadership in Motion Awards have opened. We'll be accepting nominations through September 25th. I encourage you to be thinking about who or what may be worthy of a Leadership in Motion Award. Awards are presented for projects, individuals, businesses, nonprofits, as well as collaboration. So you can find more information on the Compass website. You should also have seen some emails come through. You'll also find information on our social media channels. There are also a few flyers like this in the back of the room for those of you that are in the room if you want a reminder to take back with you. I'm happy to stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a housekeeping reminder, if you're online and you're able to turn your camera on, we have some recordings on Facebook Live. Thank you. Is there any other open discussion or announcements? Go ahead.
Thank you. Aaron Williams, ACHD. Our 5-year plan is going in front of the commission for public outreach today, and we're looking at having our public outreach go from August 6th to August 20th. And so it'd be great to get public feedback, your guys' insight on it, and yeah, we're going from there. But that's all on our side.
Thank you. Any other discussion or announcements? All right, with that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have one item to approve the July 22nd, 2026 RTEC meeting minutes.
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. Our first item will be to recommend an amendment to the FY 26-32 regional tip. Tony Tisdale.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This item is for an amendment to
Your mic is off.
I thought I hit the button, sorry. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is for an amendment to the fiscal year 2026 to 2032 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. This is at the request of the City of Nampa. CUPA staff proposes a significant increase in one project, which requires the opportunity for public comment and also board approval to move forward. So we'll get into the details of this one. It is the Northside Boulevard and Karcher Road intersection improvement. The increase of the cost is by almost $4.6 million, which is an almost 81% increase in the total cost. And this is due to the geography of the project. It's in the vicinity of the Amalgamated Sugar Factory, and the space is very limited for the turning movements, as well as there are many double trailer trucks that go through this region. And so the complexity of this roundabout ended up costing more than anticipated. We opened public comment August 1st. That was last Saturday. Due to the timing of the request and the fact that we're at the very end of the federal fiscal year, we are requesting today that you recommend this item before it has full public comments, with the realization that we will forward the final comments to you on August 17th, right before the board meeting on that same day. So you will get full comments before it's final with board action, but it will be open until midnight on the 16th. To date, we have received 3 comments so far. They're concerned about either where the funding is coming from or that if the roundabout is appropriate. So staff will post these verbatim comments for you a little bit later on. And with 3 comments so far, we don't have any changes for this amendment to go forward, but we do encourage you to read those comments as they come in, and we will stand for any questions at this point and then move into a motion. Questions? Okay. Here is the recommended motion for Resolution 13-2026.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Caleb.
Oh, thank you. Tony, so it sounds like has the scope actually changed on this project? I get the dollar amounts increased. Was a roundabout talked about originally when this was put in the tip, though? I am a little concerned about not having public comment, especially being on a freight corridor and getting some of those concerns with it going to a roundabout, but I'm less concerned if a roundabout was already talked about in the tip as a potential solution for this intersection.
Do we have? Okay, Clemente and Mark are on. Would y'all like to comment on that? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I can speak to that. This is Crystal. Oh, sorry, Clem.
No, go ahead, Crystal.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have my video on. I'm still logging in right now. Yes, a roundabout was discussed from the very beginning. When we did a concept layout on this, we were originally hoping for a signal, but the north leg of the intersection, there was right-of-way constraints that would not allow for a signal to go in. So it's been roundabout from almost the beginning. And that was what was applied for also with our federal freight grants. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
Alexa, do you have a question? No, covered it. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
I will go back to that motion.
This is Jason with Middleton. I'd make the motion as listed on the.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second,
We have a second from Alex Yan. Is there any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
We need to know who the opposition was. Okay. All right, motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to item 2. We'll move on to B, recommended adoption of the resolutions amending the CIM 2050. And we get to hear from Tony again.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, again. So today on this item, we will be combining an amendment to Communities in Motion 2050 and to recommend approval of the draft 2027 to 2033 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. We'll summarize the public comments received and also provide the timeline to complete the approval process. So within the funded project list in Communities in Motion 2050, we do include capital projects. Those are projects on Interstate 84, state highways, and principal arterials. Okay, it's not coming out right. Arterials. Intersections that involve state highways, principal arterials, or the use of federal funds, as well as other projects that use federal funds. And that's things like pathways and pedestrian improvements. So why do we amend the Communities in Motion? Sometimes often, the federally funded projects in the region must be consistent with Communities in Motion, the long-range transportation plan, and they need to be reflected in the plan before work can begin. So this proposed amendment adds new funded projects to the funding list and also reclassifies one project from funded to unfunded. And these changes reflect the updates to local agencies' plans and budgets. So let's take a look at what we're talking about today. So for the amendment to Communities in Motion 2050, we would be adding these 2 projects, 43rd Street and Kent Street. These are a subset of 12 segments that were part of a previously awarded planning grant in 2023 for Ada County Highway District. They are currently funded through the design stage, and the project is currently identified as unfunded for construction in Communities in Motion 2050. So this amendment would be to fund construction along these 2 segments and demonstrates progress towards completing the segments in Communities in Motion 2050. And secondly, reclassifying Ustick Road from Franklin to 11th Avenue in the city of Nampa. This project would widen Ustick Road that was identified as funded in, bless you, that was identified as funded in 2050, but funding is no longer anticipated, at least in the near term. It still will be considered a priority corridor for the long range plan, but would not have near-term funding. So this one would be reclassified as unfunded in Communities in Motion. So Communities in Motion, as I said, includes those regionally significant projects. However, we have a prioritized list of projects that don't currently expect to be able to pay for. So as we learn about changes to funded or unfunded, we need to amend Communities in Motion. And that first resolution 15-2026 would amend the long-range plan. And as the CIM informs the projects that can be included in the Transportation Improvement Program, this allows those projects to move forward in the draft tip. So the second resolution is to approve, including these projects for Communities in Motion, the entire draft fiscal year 2027 to 2033 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. So the draft tip was developed starting early this year and has been under review since May. Although there have been significant changes in state funding along the way through the legislative funding, we believe that all agencies involved in those projects are fully aware and informed and up to date on the changes and the reasons for those changes moving forward. So we had a public comment period the month of July for the CIM amendment, as well as the draft fiscal year 27 to 2033 TIP. No changes are recommended based on the public comments received. We did receive comments from 21 people. 15 comments are related to the CIM amendment specifically, and 24 for the draft TIP. So we do recommend that you read all of the comments that were received, as they are a good public sentiment for those projects as you move forward with design. So the verbatim comments are provided in your supplemental. We provided a draft set of comments when we mailed out the comment or the packet, and those were updated yesterday. They were posted on the supplemental as well as emailed to you with all the final comments that we received. And again, we don't recommend any changes based on the comments. They were generally in support. There were a few that were kind of all over the board, but generally in support of the projects moving forward. Compass also developed the list of projects in Boise and Elmore counties. This is for informational purposes only. It is provided in the RTAC supplemental on the website. This list will not be part of the TIP. It is considered an unofficial list of projects, but as Boise County and Elmore County are new members to Compass, we have broken out those projects from ITD's statewide improvement program to provide them an easy format to see the projects within their area. So those official projects will be included in ITD's statewide transportation improvement program. So the TIP is expected to have final approval by the end of the calendar year. Staff is requesting your recommendation today for Compass Board of Directors approval, which would occur later in August. And then the Idaho Transportation Board would be asked to review the statewide transportation plan on September 17th. And then by October or November, the TIP and STIP will be submitted, and then there's 30 days review by federal agencies. So anywhere from probably around November, we would get federal approval of the statewide transportation improvement program. The TIP is included by reference, so the STIP is the one that actually gets approval. So I will stand here for any questions and move into motion.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any, I'm not hearing any questions. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Cody Homan. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Right, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Right. Motion carries. Thank you. We will move on to our information items now. We have a status report of the Northern Canyon Ada County Connectivity Study.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of RTAC. This is an information item starting on page 16 of your packet. So today I do want to share some information about a study that we did. It was very much an internal study in-house with a group of interested stakeholders. I'll go through the background, how it came to be, the process and results of this connectivity study. For many of you, this is probably the first time you've ever heard of it, but some of you were involved from the get-go. And so as we go through this, if any of those members want to chime in, I'd greatly appreciate it. So the background, so these are the things I'm going to chat about today, is really going through what a planning level study can look like and what can come out of it to help, move a process forward. So this actually was a study that was identified in Communities in Motion 2050. We've been talking about that long range plan for, pretty much at every RTAC meeting, but it was first identified in that long range plan as an unfunded study. And it was very general. It's like, we need to look at this area, and you can look at that study area and refer back to your memo to have that in mind. So then we looked at possible connectivity in this area. And in 2024, we started the member service request process. That usually starts in January and then February. And while that process has changed a little bit, it's still something that we do where we reach out to our member agencies and say, are there projects that go above and beyond the normal things that we all support you on that you could use some extra technical, mainly technical assistance on? URTAC, those of you that were involved in this process, actually ranked this study, this member service request, as number 2, therefore making it eligible for us to work on. And if we had available work days, it was incorporated into our work program for the fiscal year 2025. In August of 2025, yes, got started a little late. There was still a lot of interest by our member agencies, City of Star, City of Middleton, Highway District 4, to really look at this area. And so we met in the City of Star, the stakeholders. City of Eagle was also at the table, Ada County Highway District, and Idaho Transportation Department. And so I presented to them an idea of how to conduct this study. Since it was done 100% in-house, we had no direct dollars, and it had to be done at a planning level. So I proposed to them the process, what kind of, managing the expectations, what are some of the things we could actually look at using our technical tools. But most importantly, it was just going to be that planning level study to help the jurisdictions determine what connections in the study area make the most sense. And the technical work did occur between October of 2025 and February. And then when we got done with the technical work, we summarized the results and met with a group in March of 2026 to just talk through the results. There was consensus by the group. I'll go through all that. And then what were those logical next steps? Oops, so sorry. That process goes like this. And I'm going to use the word foundation. And this is something you're going to hear me use as we go through other processes. But we actually have to have a starting point. So we looked at the year 2025. And that was that long, our horizon year. It was the official gross. And we also used our regional travel demand model. So when we went to the group, we said, we need to have a starting point. And then when we built scenarios looking at additional connectivity or improvements to existing roadways, that's how we started building scenarios. So in total, we ran seven different scenarios. And I'll go back and I'll go through these with you. Then we shared this with the agencies. Like I said, we did that in March, and then we are writing a technical report or a Compass report, and that is actually underway. So when we went to the group in August, we said, okay, we have to have this foundation. We have to have a starting point. And we talked about two regional corridors, State Highway 44 and Highway 16, because those are Highway 16 and I-84 were the two, boundaries for the east and west side, but then also Highway 44. We know that Highway 44, there's still a lot of conversations. It's still going through a pre-NEPA process, but we had to have a conversation about, do we assume some improvements to these two regional facilities as a starting point? And so there was agreement that we would include improvements to State Highway 44 and also North Highway 16 per the approved reevaluation that had been done. Then we start building on that foundation. So every scenario we ran was incremental. I don't know why I keep saying we, it was me. So every scenario I ran, it was incremental. So we could actually show that what can we do with what we just have in as part of our transportation system, but what happens if we start making additional connectivity? So as part of the foundation, we looked at projects that we already had identified in Communities in Motion 2050. They were unfunded, but these are also very important corridors, roadways to this area. And so you can see on the map that we made just some improvements to, whether it be Purple Sage, Middleton Road, one of the most critical north-south connecting roads, Emmett, Goodson, and also Highway 30 that parallels I-84. So that was the second scenario. And then we start building the other ones where we actually look at additional connectivity. So there were 7 of them, including the foundation. And like I said, it's incremental. So what if we just made improvements to some of the corridors in the area? What if we made a new connection looking at Galloway or at Goodson? What if we actually also added a new connection over to I-84? All of these things are just planning level to be studied further as we move forward. I am going to focus on two of the scenarios because they were the most comprehensive. So and we'll go through those right now. So on scenario B2, we looked at the Goodson Road connection. Remember, we were focusing on two corridors, Galloway or Goodson. And we said, well, what if we connected it as an arterial and we connected it over to North Highway 16, but also added access at I-84? Remember, there's no access study funded for I-84 looking at a new interchange. But we wanted to see what the potential demand, that's what those numbers are in there, the potential demand for a new connection in this area. But we also had to make other connections. You can see those Lansing and Kingsbury. There is a lack of connectivity in these areas. There's some topology and some other things that make it a little more challenging, that why they don't exist today, but could exist. So when you look at these numbers, you're like, well, what does 6,000 really mean to me today? And that's very much like sections of Beacon Light Road today, Beacon Light between Highway 16 and Highway 55. And then closer to that 9,000 as we approach I-84. And then the next scenario was looking at the road just 1 mile south of Goodson, Galloway, very much the same idea, making a connection over to the North Highway 16, but also additional connectivity at I-84, seeing that you can see those potential 2055 demands are slightly higher, but also very similar to some of the roadways that we see today. So while the differences between the demand on Goodson and Galloway aren't very large, there still are some differences, but also as we sat and talked through these with the folks at that meeting in March, and again, as a reminder, City of Middleton, City of Star, Highway District 4, ACHD was there, and also Idaho Transportation Department. There was a conversation and an agreement that Galloway made a little bit more sense. Some of you are thinking, well, yeah, it's a little bit closer to where the growth is, but they're also in looking at some of the topology on the eastern end of Galloway, it may be a little more feasible to make that connection. So a few takeaways and things to remember about this study. It was an unfunded study identified in CIM 2050. It was a very planning level study. I think this goes without saying, connectivity is good. We have some areas that lack a little bit of a connectivity. It used our official 2055 growth and our regional travel demand model. It gave us a sense of what this roadway could or might look like, looking at the actual volumes that we have today on an existing roadway north of Eagle called Beacon Light. And then there was consensus about Galloway Road being the one that made the most sense to start, looking at a little bit further for potential connectivity. So then the next steps, obviously, I need to complete a report and get this all documented, and that will be available to everybody when it is done. And then other things, thinking about those next steps, it could be initiated by any of the members that participated in this study, is the conversation of first looking at modifying the long-range planning functional classification map. Some of you may not be as familiar with that. If and when the time comes that we will make modifications to it, RTAC will be involved in that. But making Galloway the one that we focus on, it being the principal arterial. And then future analysis of Galloway. Remember, there's several miles of Galloway that don't exist. Really looking at the feasibility and possible alignments, because that allows those member agencies, as development occurs and other things occur, to make sure that we can preserve and have the opportunity to potentially build a new road through that area. And then when it comes to looking at I-84, if it's about a 7-mile gap between interchanges between exit 25 and exit 17, is looking at a possible access study when the time is right to look at what makes sense for an additional interchange in that area. So again, planning level study, none of these steps are binding. They just give clarity to the agencies involved to allow the process to move forward when they see the time is fit. With that, open for questions.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Thanks. Marianne, did you show the difference in when you were looking at or presenting the demand on what was it, B1 and C1? Was that relative to not the foundation, but I mean, it was relative to the foundation, right? So I guess I'm curious how that compared to building up the existing, which was like option 1, maybe, or A. I think you were using letters.
Yeah, I'm just using letters. We can go back here. So thinking about if we just said we did the regional ones, and then we just looked at the existing system. Right. So we do look at the demand, but if you look at Goodson and Galloway, they're not connected beyond Middleton Road. So the demand under a situation like this was very low on those 2 corridors. But what these corridors did once we made additional connectivity is it helped with circulation and also started to maybe, lack of a better term, moderate the demand on Purple Sage, because Purple Sage is the only east-west connecting road in this area. So is that?
Yeah, I think that helps. Maybe a few clarifications.
Go ahead.
So if you made, because there's no interchange of Purple Sage either, right?
Correct.
Was that an option that was looked at?
No, that wasn't an option we looked at, no.
And the arterials that were envisioned for Goodson and for Galloway were how large?
We did analyze them as 5-lane facilities at a 45 or 50 mile per hour, because they were intended to be more of a, use an Ada County Highway District term, a mobility corridor. What would this operate like? Yeah.
And it sounds like the specific alignments for either of them are still very much in the future, but would either Goodson or especially Galloway take advantage of Willow Creek? Or would you imagine a whole separate connection? Or Edna, Willow Creek, I'm not sure what it's called there.
Over at the Northern 16 connection, yes, we hooked them into where they were anticipating access to the North State Highway 16 per the reeval, and they have identified where they would have interchanges, right in, right out, or overpasses. So we did purposely connect it into that at appropriate locations.
Thank you. Well, sorry, maybe one more final question. So the idea of not I guess why wasn't Purple Sage looked at as also a new arterial? Was it the existing conditions or the built environment around it that keep it from being a 5-lane arterial?
Yeah, a couple situations about Purple Sage. Yes, you do have front-on housing and some proximity of it, but it doesn't mean that we don't evaluate it. If you do look on the eastern end of Purple Sage, you are going through existing subdivisions, a lot of topographical constraints is there. Way back in the day, we actually did look at something called the Purple Light connection. It was Beacon Light to Purple Sage, and it was found to be extremely problematic. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Stephen. Is there any other questions? Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just kind of curious about how maybe comprehensive plans and city plans play a role in that. Just looking at, thank you, Marianne, also for the presentation, but just kind of looking at the long range aspect of it and looking at Canyon County's comp plan, still designated rural over there. So just kind of seeing how that ties in.
Definitely thinking that's a great question. Thinking about our 2055 official demographic data set, it is based on existing entitlements and really looking at the county still platting or entitling some subdivisions at slightly lower, more rural density. So we had to be aware of it. So that official demographic data set is pretty true to what we knew about comp plans, areas of impact, and where some of those are. Absolutely, when you start thinking about can we make a 4-5 mile connection, the built environment and some of those things that will stop to be taken into consideration. That's why that next step of looking at Galloway, the feasibility, could we do this and how could we do it, is so important.
Thank you.
Right. If there are no other questions, we'll move to the next informational item.
I promise not to pick the mic up.
Sorry.
All right. So Austin is serving on jury, and I have been cramming on this. I have listened to the RTAC meeting from July, 2 rounds of it, really good conversation, good questions. We were really just hoping with this one to bring this back, reiterate the big picture, why we do what we do, and also maybe just clarify why we use a certain term and other things that you have given us direction to do. So based on, we're going to go through the July, what we heard, try to bring us all back on the same page in that big picture, how this all works in CIM 2055, and then how we want to move forward. You will see all of this stuff again. So in July, what Austin presented on and spent quite a bit of time on are the 4 categories for prioritization. Roadways, I think that's the one that most of the conversation surrounded around. The active transportation, that is our regional pathways, public transportation, Valley Regional Transit System, and the Valley Connect 3.0. And then also the new one of rail crossings and how we are starting to bring that into this process. So what we heard is, how do we address things on a roadway when we want to talk about corridors and projects, especially about bridges, our bridges potential bottlenecks. And these don't necessarily have to be big bridges. These can be some of those canal crossings. We do have some very large canals that are complicated, but also our Boise River is as well. And then about the environmental scoring. Keep in mind with the environmental scoring, it's only 10 points of everything and nothing's going to be perfect. No project or corridor is going to be without some environmental considerations. But we can address environmental once we start going through the process, looking how some of the projects are coming out in prioritization and environmental scoring, that I always have to say the word natural environment, so I keep it straight in my brain, is does it become informational or does it become still a numeric value part of prioritization? And then I can't remember who brought it up. Stephen, it may have been you, but making sure that we've done such a thorough job in showing how our CIM goals and objectives tied to scoring on the roadway side. We need to do the same thing with the other categories: active transportation, public transportation, and then the railroad. And so we need to do a better job, because there was a conversation of how do we deal with safety when it comes to public transportation. It may not be a regional thing, but a very specific thing. And so we need to continue to work through some of those details. And then also the terms we use. We talk about prioritizing corridors, but we also know that corridors are made up of segments and segments are made up of projects. And we have to have enough detail in order to do some, costing. So again, that big picture. When we look, the long range plan, like our CIM, has the multimodal plans for the transportation system. We need to serve that growth, but how that growth is expected to occur, where it's expected to occur. And we need to look at this 20-year longer horizon. And so we're planning for a growth of 1.3 million people. And some of you have seen this, some of you are involved very much in that process by 2055. So our long range plan needs to address this growth and how we serve the growth that we're planning for. The transportation needs should be also identified in that plan. And thinking about when we identify something in a long range plan, the goal is to make sure our long range plan informs our transportation improvement program that Tony presented on. And so that's the whole idea, is if we go through and we're growing to 2055 and we're identifying some needs on our system and we identify those in the long range plans, that's the first step to getting them into our programming process, whether it be a small piece or a larger segment. It's also important to note that there are federal requirements, and those federal requirements are to identify needs on our transportation facilities. But our region has chosen to go a step further and go through this prioritization process. And so the prioritization process is intended to be data-driven, but it's also just intended to inform. So those, our elected officials that have to make those hard decisions have some information before them to help them with that decision. It's not going to make the decision for them, but else inform their decision as they move forward. Because we know that that could be very challenging, and we know that there's hard decisions that have to be made. So as we identify why we prioritize, we identify those investments that might be or likely to be most beneficial to our system in the near term. We'll talk about what we're near term in that year that we're going to start with on the technical analysis. But we also want to have that regional perspective. Some of you are thinking, well, I just have this 1 mile of arterial that we need to improve. How is that regional? Well, it is when it's part of circulation and part of the system. But it also does provide some of that direction and transparency to the public. As we go through this process, we talk a lot about our long-range plan, we talk a lot about growth, but this is also a good opportunity as we start to identify needs, is show the public that yes, we are doing our due diligence, and these are the things that we think would be most beneficial to our system as we continue to move forward. And then with that regional perspective, so why we're prioritizing, this also is kind of the semantics of when, of course, federal regulations, we look at federal regulations, but it also just simply says we need to be able to identify needs of our transportation system in enough detail that we can do good cost estimates. And our long-range plan has to be fiscally constrained. So if we go through and we identify a corridor, we need to know some of the elements of that corridor in order to do those cost estimates. And so that's why it's important that we can have a little bit of flexibility in the level of what we're looking at, whether it be a corridor, we have 4 or 5 miles left of this corridor, or a 1 mile piece that we need to fix, like an overpass or a bridge. And then on the needs in our long-range plan, and I just went through one of them, we identify studies. Because studies can also be a first step in identifying some of our needs. Then we look at corridors. Corridors could be routes, but they could be very long in, several miles, or they could be slightly shorter as well. And so looking at those concepts, whether it be a long-term unfunded, that high level, that corridor, that study that gives us a lot of flexibility because there's still a lot of details to work out versus those segments. We have 2 more miles of U-stick that we need to, one of them just, that Tony talked about, it was a 1 mile of U-stick that we need to really think about, and how are we going to get that, what are the elements of that project and of that cost. So it's a little more detailed as we move forward. So in CIM 2055, I believe it was determined that we are going to prioritize corridors, understanding that our corridors are made up of segments and projects. So how are the corridors identified? On the roadway side, we will be using the regional travel demand model. That study I just presented to you used the regional travel demand model. We will start with that. And we will be doing what we call a deficiency analysis. We'll start with a set year, set of demographics, a set assumption of projects or things that we're going to do, and run through that. And then on the active transportation, that was discussed in July. Those have been discussed with the work group, and we're staying more at those regional pathways, that regional pathway level. As far as public transportation, talked about with Valley Regional Transit using their Valley Connect 3.0 and the elements that we'll be using to help prioritize those. And then the new one, the rail crossings, as we identified using a mapping analysis. Where do we have rail crossings? What type of crossings are they? What's the existing volume? What's the forecasted volume? I am very well aware and heard Tom Law's comment, but we may have one that's just signed, but that's all we could do because of the proximity of that railroad to the roadway. Remember, all of this is going to come back to you. So those of you that have that knowledge will be able to share that with us so we can be sensitive to it and note it as we move forward. So again, on the CIM 2055, we are going to look at those regionally significant corridors. For example, we look at roadways that are broadly the interstate the state highways, principal arterials, and also those that are on the national highway system. We don't have much on the national highway system. No, we do have the national highway system. It's pretty much those state highways. It was more the strategic highway network, which is a little bit smaller, and that was noted in the scoring process. On here, you can also see that we've had a couple studies that are underway. The northern connectivity one that I just presented to you. We're finishing up the southern connectivity study. I believe that's going to come back to RTAC, presented by the consultants working on that. And then also Lake Hazel, a lot of momentum behind that Lake Hazel connection. And I believe there was a grant awarded to the city to do a little bit deeper look on that corridor as well. So those also feed into it. And this is basically the system we're going to start looking at. So how are we going to do, this is actually how are we going to do the analysis? We are going to start with a transportation system that we think will be in place by 2035, but we're going to test that on our 2055 official demographic data set. That is very much what member agencies do and look at when they're starting to establish a capital improvement plan, looking in the future. And we have already reached out to a couple of our agencies looking at their project list from their 5-year work program and also their capital improvement plans, and saying, what do you think, based on everything that we know today, the most information we have, what do you think will get accomplished by 2035? So we'll be building that 2035 transportation system. We'll be working with Valley Regional Transit for their transit routes for that, to make sure we mimic that. We've already met with Idaho Transportation Department and also Ada County Highway District. And so a few more members on the list to chat with about that. So once we build that and we look at it and we start identifying possible congestion or deficiencies, is it needed by 2035 or is it needed by 2055? And then that's how we start building out our list. And that list will come back to you, and that is the list of corridors and projects that will actually start going through the prioritization process. You can see how this goes through. If we don't need it by 2035, we're not going to stop there. We'll still be evaluating 2055. Do we potentially need it by 2055? If not, does it become a study? Could a study help? Are there some other things that we need to address? But is this a project or a corridor that is needed by sometime after 2035? It still goes on the list. And this is something we did in 2050 for some of you that had the opportunity to go through this with us. And this is how we'll be going through the roadway deficiency. All right, so the process forward. So in July, Austin presented a lot of information to you, a lot of really good discussion. Today, I wish Austin was here to bring this forward, because he just was so much more involved. But really to say, we heard your concerns, we are making changes to our process, but then he is going to come back to you in September to review that methodology, make sure we've got all the changes integrated to look at that approval for our methodology as we move forward. That will then go to our board in October, because remember, our board only meets every other month. And then we will start going through the heavy technical analysis through fall and winter. We'll be bringing you along as we go through this process, because I think once we start an initial set, you get to see how we work through these things, and it really helps clarify, and even we can make some minor tweaks and refinements to that prioritization process and that scoring. And then in the spring, you'll be able to see the CIM 2055 and how that scoring is actually coming forward, and that prioritization. Keep in mind, as much as we all value data-driven and like the numeric side of things, when we do the prioritization, there have been situations where a corridor, for a variety of reasons, doesn't quite score as well as we hoped it would. There's always opportunities to have those conversations about those corridors and thinking about it and how we treat them as we move forward. So again, we're going to be bringing you all along. And as we develop our corridors and some of enough detail, we'll also be doing the funding forecast and costing. We're not going to make up new costs for projects in CIM. We will be using all of the information that you all have available to us, which we truly appreciate. So all this is coming back to you next month. And then I guess there's a call for projects for the transportation improvement program that is next month. And I think Matt presented on that last time. So, all right. You guys have any questions?
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
I think a lot of our discussion last one was about the way environmental factors factored into your corridor assessment. So Middleton Road, which goes all the way north-south, say it crosses the Boise River, and that would be, say, an environmental area. And we were giving negative points for projects that touched environmental things. Does that mean all of projects on Middleton Road would get that negative effect? I think maybe the where we were going was, is it possible to acknowledge that environmental impacts are an important thing to compass, but not necessarily include them in the way we rank the corridors?
I think Middleton is one of the best examples of, we said, yes, we will prioritize these corridors, but Middleton only has one river crossing. So you're absolutely right. So that's why looking at Middleton in segments and some of the work that you've already accomplished with realignment of Middleton will be taken into consideration. Absolutely. When it comes to the environment, if we go through the scoring process and we have the environmental, but you as a committee to say, I'd rather have the environmental considerations, informational only, and not part of the numeric score. Yes, but I think we need to kind of go through the process, get the list, see how some of these are shaking out, but absolutely that is still on the table.
Thank you, that helps. And Middleton was just an example as something I knew crossed the river, but there are certainly lots of other environmental maps, right? There's as many maps as you'd like to make on environmental things. So I think that would be a good approach where we acknowledge it, but make it not a corridor criteria for scoring.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Jason, I'm curious about actually everybody regarding the environmental. One of the things that we had some conversation on was not so much in the meeting, but afterward was, it seems like kind of a negative. Well, it seems like the safety, some of the other things are like, we're improving that and you get scores for that. The environmental was almost like a screening criteria to say, this is something that if we see large environmental impacts, then it becomes more difficult to implement. And so it gets a negative score. And in that way, it felt like sort of a reverse metric compared to the others. And so I guess I would still be curious if there is discussion about how that environmental score could be. And again, I don't know if that's the interest of the rest of the group, but if it's meaningful to flip that so that you could be talking about if the project is addressing an environmental issue, then it gets a positive score rather than kind of like a feasibility screening to say, well, this one's just really difficult, so we're going to give it a negative score. Is that still under consideration?
Yeah, and so for environmental considerations, keep in mind it's only 10 points, and you're right, it's kind of we were doing more the top-down approach on environmental, and also thinking about feasibility and complexity. While there's a lot of environmental factors and went through the environmental work group, keep in mind some of that stuff we probably wouldn't even know until you started implementation. And I don't think environmental considerations are going to be a deal breaker on any corridor or project, especially being sensitive about those long corridors that maybe have one challenging section. We don't want that one challenging section to impact the validity and importance and priority of that whole corridor. But absolutely. And again, I think as we develop the list and start working through the process, it will become more clear on how it's most appropriate to deal with the environmental considerations.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Alexa.
Marianne, curious for the study that you previously presented, would it make sense to kind of work through your flow chart if Goodson or Galloway is considered? Does that kind of like just pass over everything else and it will go into CIM now that it has been a study has been completed?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, Alexa, that's a great question. The study was intended to give our partners in that area some guidance and at least give them something to point to that this makes more sense. No, it will not leapfrog anything. It can be part of the deficiency analysis, but it's also an opportunity to look at something like purple sage, which is getting a lot of demand because of the growth in that area. But if we can make an additional connection, can that help with what's potentially could occur on purple sage? So it won't leapfrog anything. It might just be part of the prioritization process as we move forward. And that's just no different than, an overpass or another river crossing. So it's going to be treated equally. So again, going back to the 3 studies that are underway, yeah, those will all be treated equally based on some of the outcomes.
Are there any other questions?
Sure, a few more, Madam Chair. So about the I guess there were a couple. So the deficiency analysis, this is more semantic. That includes all modes, right? When we're looking at that deficiency analysis, that's across all modes.
Right, for roadways with the regional travel demand model will include your route, so that's taken into account. But the analysis for active transportation has already been gotten through the work group focusing on those regional corridors. So how we deal with, is something really deficient or is it really about filling a gap? So it'll be treated a little bit differently with different information.
But if you first go to the next slide where we're looking at that flow chart, when we do this needs improvement by 35, I guess that's where I was understanding that the deficiency analysis occurs, that applies to all modes. Is that, or no?
Primarily roadways.
So how does that work for the other modes then?
With public transportation, we'll be using your Valley Connect 3.0 and going through that evaluation. Public transportation, active transportation has gone through with the work group identifying those regional corridors. And then also with the railroad crossings, that's new, so we'll continue that evaluation, but we will be able to use some information from the regional travel demand model looking at growth at those potential crossings to help identify where we might want to focus some efforts, where you can actually make a change. And so that's how we'll handle this one. But this one's primarily that roadway corridor prioritization using the regional model.
But if I'm understanding this right, like if I'm thinking about this as a flow chart for the entire CIM 2050 and the corridor priority scoring, there's some, if I could call it just that, the deficiency analysis across all modes, different ways you get in there. It's not all the roadway deficiency, but there's some analysis that looks at what needs to be done by 2035 that puts it into this grouping that goes into the corridor priority scoring. Because there could be things that are either non-motorized or transit or rail that are more like a 2055 need that wouldn't go into the corridor prioritization.
No, it still would, but it's also already gone through a process like on active transportation, has already gone through that process with the work group and looking at those regional corridors. When we think about that one on deficiency, is it, an area that connects multiple regions? What's the first logical connection we can do? Those will still be identified, but you're absolutely right, through a different process. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Marianne. So I understand. So a corridor will have different types of scores. It's going to have a roadway type and an active transportation type. Okay, correct. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Discussion? Thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you to Compass. Thank you to everybody who was willing to speak up with concerns last month. Sounds like it was a lively meeting. And I appreciate the Compass staff taking that to heart and making some changes to make this work better for our community. All right, with that, there's a couple of status reports in your packet. There's an agenda worksheet and obligation report. The next meeting will be on September 23rd. That will stand for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Jason. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Stephen, all in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Have a good day.